Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Angeline Boulley. Angeline is an enrolled member of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians, is a storyteller who tells about her Ojibwe community in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. She is a former director of the Office of Indian Education at the U.S. Department of Education. Her debut novel, Firekeeper's Daughter, was an instant #1 New York Times bestseller and a recipient of many international accolades, including the ALA Printz Award and Morris Awards, the YA Goodreads Choice Award, the Walter Award for Outstanding Children's Literature, and is Carnegie Mellon nominated. Angeline lives in Southwest Michigan, but her home will always be on Sugar Island. Welcome, Angeline.
Oh, Miigwech, thank you very much for inviting me.
I know I love as I told Angeline before we started recording, was a huge fan of her very first novel, Firekeeper's Daughter, and so it was such a thrill to get to read Sisters in the Wind. Look at these gorgeous. Whoever does the art on these covers, and Angeline, is unbelievable. It's so fabulous.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, isn't it?
Moses Lunham is the artist for the first, and the Sisters in the Wind, it's Emily Kawashigig.
Oh, they're beautiful. I love this. Well, so before we dig into all the wonderful things, can you tell our listeners a little bit about Sisters in the Wind?
Oh, so Sisters in the Wind follows 18-year-old Lucy Smith, and she's recently aged out of the foster care system. And then a mysterious man comes up to her and introduces himself. He's Native, and he's an attorney that helps former foster children, if who are Native, to make connections if they're interested in reconnecting with family back home. And Lucy did not know that she was Native until she was a teen. And so it's really a story about those connections and those of our children and teens that were taken away, the ones who find their way home and the ones who don't.
Yeah, it's an incredibly powerful story. I gobbled this up. It is really about family and sort of generations of family and the characters. So tell us a little. So there are two characters. Jamie is the the attorney who comes into her life, and then there are characters in the story that go back to the Firekeeper's Daughter, which for me was such a treat. So remind us, is it Donis? Am I pronouncing it right?
Yes, yes.
Um, Tell us a little bit about them. Remind us, because that was so fun to get a chance, even though it's been a long time since that story, those characters stayed with me.
Oh, wonderful. So, yes, Jamie is back. He's that mysterious attorney, and he calls for help. And the person he calls is Donis. It turns out that, and this is not a big spoiler, but Lucy is connected to. She's the half sister of their dear friend Lily, who passed away in Firekeeper's Daughter. And so both Donis and Jamie really feel. A strong connection with Lucy, and they want to help her uh, come back home to Sugar Island, to a family that have never known her but very much want to. And Lucy, for as tempted as she is to reconnect, she's on the run. She is trying to outrun someone from her past who very much wants to harm her. So it's that mystery thriller and reconnecting, and of course delving into Native identity.
Yeah, so tell so I know there's books in between, so I'm missing the whole story. Is this the first time you've gone back to the characters from Firekeeper's Daughters, or are they sort of in all the stories that I need to get caught up?
You're in all of the stories, but you're actually in a really good spot because my third book, Sisters in the Wind, actually takes place 5 years after the events in Firekeeper's Daughter and 5 years before the events in my second book, Warrior Girl on Earth. So,
I can now go read that one in
yeah,
order. I'll do it
right.
chronologically.
But really, I write my books each with a new protagonist and but with familiar faces from Sugar Island. And so my books are written to be read in whatever order
Yes,
you want to jump in.
yes, and that's actually a really good point because I did not for any moment think, oh God, I gotta look back at Firekeeper's Daughter to understand the story. It was more like a treat to be like, wait a minute, I know these names, I know these characters, and then to get to sort of remember that the beauty of that story. So the plot of this, I mean, really, it's about the themes, as you said, of Native children being removed from their families, being taught. I mean, Lucy is told that she doesn't basically not to be native, that to say you're Mexican because being, some advantage to not being native. And just the heartache that comes from being ripped, her identity being hidden from her, denied, the loss of her father. So many aspects of feel so potent. I want to hear about how you develop the story part because the other parts of the story of Lucy's story are so beautifully plotted, woven into the same sort of themes that you carry through all of your books, which are, these themes and also survivors. I mean, these women and men, but they are survivors. So how do you do this? What's your method?
Well, I do quite a bit of research. So, in addition to reading legislation and the Indian Child Welfare Act, it
Yeah.
was passed in 1978,
Yeah.
and it is designed to keep Native children with their families. And if they do need to be removed from their home, um, that every effort is made to place them with immediate family and then with extended family or within a Native community.
Right.
And we know that children and teens who know their Native identity, they have better outcomes in school. They have better outcomes, in a lot of different ways. And so when Lucy finds out that she's Native, and then when the social worker is doing this intake, and Lucy says, "I think my birth mother is Native," the social worker, yes, says, "Oh, don't mention that. It complicates things. Just say that you're Mexican." And Lucy thinks, well, who does it complicate for?
Mhm.
And what we found is that there are uh, social services workers and court personnel who really don't understand the law and view it as a hassle, extra paperwork, more hoops to jump through. And so people, children and teens are actively discouraged from saying that they're Native in order for it to bypass the law.
Yeah, it's clear. I mean, it's clear that you understand the inner workings of that, and that these stories feel very, very based in reality. Is there, I notice, and I love that both Jamie and Donna's work. I mean, Jamie's work in the program to sort of find, these children and help them. Which is, it sounds. I'm not projecting your future books, but it sounds like, that is sort of where Lucy is headed, which is so wonderful. So when you do the research about sort of these, the real things that are happening with these children, is it a spark that happens? You think, okay, well, this is the kind of situation. Do you start with Lucy and what her backstory is? I'm always curious about sort of the origin, right? I mean, obviously, the origin for you is the Native communities, but sort of more the origin of the actual individual character.
Well, the origin really was Jamie.
Okay.
In Firekeeper's Daughter, of course, he's working undercover, and he does, confide in Donis that he is Native, but he really doesn't have any connection. He doesn't really know where he's from, and so I always wanted to tell his story and knew that it involved the foster care system, but it really, in 2023, the US Supreme Court ruled in Holland versus Brackeen, and it was a case that challenged the legitimacy of uh, the Indian Child Welfare Act, and the Supreme Court upheld it. But we know that the fight to protect it is not over. There will always be people with deep pockets and vested interests in trying to dismantle the Indian Child Welfare Act, because what it does is it uh, it, for lack of a better word, it validates tribal sovereignty. It demonstrates that tribes are sovereign nations, that they have an inherent right to the welfare of their children, of future members, of the survival of their tribe. Um, and so, knowing that the Supreme Court case went our way in this instance, but there are no guarantees. The only guarantee is that there will be people trying again to angle back through a different legal aspect to challenge it. So I really wanted to tell a story that, educated people who don't know about, the Indian Child Welfare Act, about why it matters, why it's so important, the outcomes that happen when the act is followed, and the heartbreak and that happens when it's disregarded.
Yeah, and it is, I mean, you're right. That what a, and and of course everyone fell in love with Jamie in Firekeeper's daughter, so it was wonderful to see him in this sort of grown-up role because as you said, he seems to have finally found his identity, which is something he was very much seeking in that book, in the first book. And the foster care system in general, you've obviously done a ton of research about the kinds of situations because Lucy has obviously very bad foster care situations, and then she has some really sweet ones.
Mhm.
So that's okay. So when you've got sort of you're telling Jamie's story through Lucy, are you somebody who sort of has it all? Are you mapping this out for months and months before you dig in and write, or are you sort of like writing and then sort of figuring it out as you go?
I'm kind of that halfway in between. I usually know, it's kind of like I know the foundation for the house and I know the scaffolding,
Mhm.
but finishing walls and rooms and windows and everything takes research that I do along the way. And then I'm not afraid to let like any crazy old thought come into my mind and think, let me follow this thread and see what happens. And so, yeah, Lucy's story is kind of that combination of me plotting where I think the story is going, and then just, the characters surprising me and, taking me down a different road.
Right, and I'm curious to know. I mean, we don't do spoilers, so we're not going to talk about the end, but the end is pretty fucking, pardon my French, amazing.
Well,
I do
thank
swear.
you.
We swear on the show, but only when it's really warranted. But it is really warranted. And I'm curious to know is that something you sort of knew? I mean, I'm not talking about the very ending, but the sort of ending before the sort of months later part. Um,
Right, right.
'Cause
Yeah, I did. I usually do start my stories where I know the beginning, I know the ending, and I know that midpoint, kind of turn the story on its head kind of thing, shake everything up. I usually do know that. That's part of the scaffolding, I think.
Yeah. And and then the other thing I loved about this book and your books and now that having read both two of them in general is the sort of depth of those minor characters, which I think is hard to achieve. A lot of times, we end up, meeting, and there are quite a few characters in the different foster homes, from a young girl, Stacy, that she gets to know, to, of course, Devery, who she's sort of is her older sister character in one of the foster homes, and then a whole bunch of characters. She lives in one foster home where there are quite a number of, there's nine, I think, at some point around that, other foster kids, and they all really kind of rise to the surface, which I think is amazing. And I think we have a lot of listeners who are aspiring writers or new writers, and I wonder, are you somebody who sort of does character studies of your characters? I mean, you knew Jamie, obviously, and Donis, but how do you develop a new character? Is it something that happens through the course of writing? Or is it something you're like, okay, I'm going to have this foster sister I need to develop, and so I'm going to do some sort of like, work on that.
I think it's more in the course of writing that, the characters, it sounds corny to say that they tell you who they are. Maybe I start out with a need in mind of, Donis needs maybe a mirror image, or,
Mhm.
especially, with Stacy, like seeing her younger self in this foster sister,
Yeah.
and, the protectiveness that brings out in Lucy. But it was like writing her that she came to me, and the way that she would show how excited she was when Lucy wanted to read books to her, and just little quirks about her. And those things I just love discovering on the way. That's where I really feel like the characters do, speak to me. So
They do. It's a little bit of magic, right? It's a
it
weird
is.
little bit of magic, I think. So tell us,
Yep.
so go back, because obviously Firekeeper's daughter, I'd love to hear sort of the story, how you sort of, because that was a Reese pick, as I recall, right?
Yes.
And obviously we all know that that means just a crazy, amount of success and all that, and but before that happened, how long did it take you to write the story? What were your sort of, what I'm sure it was obviously that's not how it doesn't happen that all of a sudden you're this hugely successful author. We know that there's some
Right.
steps before that. So,
Right.
how did that happen?
It was a 36-year overnight sensation.
I
So
love it.
I actually I moved back to New Buffalo during the pandemic after I got the book deal. I now live in my old high school. We are sitting in one of my former math classes,
You're
and
kidding. Oh my
nope, I
goodness.
am not kidding. And so I was a senior in high school, and a friend of mine who went to a different school nearby told me about a new boy in all of her classes, and that she thought he might be my type. She was a really good friend looking out for me. And after a few weeks, she said, no, he really isn't your type. He doesn't play sports, and he hangs out with the hardcore partiers. We call them stoners.
I
And
remember. Yeah, that's my
yeah,
generation
yeah.
too. Yeah.
A month before graduation, she said that there was a drug bust in their school, and it turned out that the new boy was actually an undercover police officer. And this was right before the original 21 Jump Street series with Johnny Depp. So I had no clue that that was even a thing, that a police officer who looked young could pose as a high school student as part of an undercover investigation. And I just remembered thinking, what if I had been introduced to this boy or young man?
Right.
And what if we liked each other? Or what if he needed my help? And that was kind of the spark that stayed with me for decades, literally, was, why would some undercover investigation need the help of an ordinary 18-year-old Ojibwe girl? And really, it was through the course of about 20 years of working in Indian education, working in different Native communities, including my own in Sault Ste. Marie and Sugar Island, that that I kind of worked out the puzzle pieces of how this investigation might be plausible, and to take place on a federal reservation, and just all of these things. So I started writing when I was 44, just kind of that, if not now, when?
Right.
I've always said I was going to write this story, and it was such a great idea. It just wouldn't, go away from me.
Right.
So and it took 10 years to write a version that I felt was strong enough to get me an agent and a book deal. And yeah, so I got an agent within 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks after we went out on submission, I received a seven-figure offer at auction. So it seemed like I came out of nowhere, but
Yeah, no, nobody comes, I understand. Nobody
yeah,
comes out of nowhere, of course.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
mean, really, like this is, I mean, for a lot of mainstream readers, and myself included, this was the first native book that was so out there. It was everywhere. And that had to feel, I mean, you were really blazing a path. And I have Vanessa Lilly is a really good friend of mine. And I don't know if you know that name. She's a newer Cherokee author. But I think you really opened some doors for a lot of native writers and also to the brain to a lot of people who just we did not know what the stories were, and I mean that has to feel really powerful.
It really does. And there's things for aspiring authors. You can have a great idea. You can have a great amount of talent writing, and you can have the dedication to sit at, and put the words on page. Um, but there are some intangibles, and the market, it just so happened that the market was ready for a mystery thriller featuring a strong Native female protagonist, contemporary, and I happen to have
Yeah.
a manuscript that, you know, the timing, it really was. So, and it was a
Uh,
game changer because
yes.
a lot of times, well, my book deal was huge,
Yeah.
and so people were like, who is she? I came out of nowhere. I don't have a master's in fine arts and creative writing. I hadn't attended prestigious writers workshops. I was a complete nobody. um, and so there was a lot riding on my debut, and it did perform very well, both commercial and literary success.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
what it did is it showed that our stories are marketable. And so for me, seeing other Native authors, Indigenous authors getting deals and seeing their books, to me, it's a joy. It's I'm so happy.
Yeah, and you have to. I mean, it's interesting that you sort of t touched on the other side of it, which is that of course it was a huge honor and very exciting, but there was pressure attached to it, right? I mean, there's sort of pressure in the idea that if you're the original, in this case, the original contemporary native voice, that you are setting the tone for this a whole other generation. So how? I mean, and then there's book two, which is always so much harder than book one, right? I mean, it's just as every author who's published more than one book knows, book two is really daunting. So how was that? I mean, would it,
Well, I want to touch back on what you said about
yes,
that pressure. And this is not pressure that my publisher, Macmillan, put
yeah,
on me. This was
yeah,
pressure
yeah,
that, for the size of my book deal and the expectation, it's kind of like playing baseball in the minor leagues, and you get called up to the majors and you get one time at bat. And if you do not get on base, it will be a very long time before someone from a marginalized community like yours gets that opportunity.
right,
And so I did feel pressure that if my book did not perform to expectation, that it might harm uh, other Indigenous
right.
writers that are trying to get their, book deals. So yeah, there was that. Regarding book two, it took 10 years for me to write Firekeeper's Daughter. I had 1 year to write Warrior Girl Unearthed. And actually, I tried to psych myself up that I was a stronger writer going into book two.
For sure.
I knew more about plot and telling a story, things I had to learn throughout that 10-year process. Um, so I thought about that. And then the main character in that story, Perry, she's just this force of nature. And she popped into my head fully formed, told me exactly who she was, what she was up to. And I just had to just start typing
But
away.
yeah, you're
It was
along
like,
for the ride. I love that.
yeah. And so that happened. And so I actually had a more difficult time with my third book
Interesting.
than my second book. The second was like lightning in a bottle, and if if I could package that. But yeah, the third book was really difficult. Again, I was on a timeline and or deadlines and that, but it was such a difficult topic,
Mhm.
and really feeling a responsibility to those current and former foster kids. And, that I think there was a lot more pressure that I put on myself for my third book.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your women because this is Killer Women, and we only talk to women, and we love to talk about women. And each of your characters, and I haven't met Perry yet, but she's in my very very near future because I can't wait to meet her. But the women, I mean, and not this isn't to discount characters like Jamie and even Lucy's dad, who was a good man, but also maybe a little misguided, and he did the best he thought he could, and then he died. Unfortunately, he died when she was young, right?
Right.
But these women, I think there's something also about empowering, young women of every, race, color, origin, because I think that there are even, women in general more marginalized than our male counterparts. So when I love that the idea that Perry was fully formed, but you have obviously a very strong female voice. So what, where does that come from for you? Do you sort of think, was that from your mother's, sisters, aunts, or is it from something that you experienced? I mean, I feel like there's plenty of wonderful ways these things develop.
Sure. I think for me, it came through after I graduated from college, I went to work for one tribe in Michigan. And it was my first time living and working in a Native community. So I grew up, my dad's Native, my mom's not, but we always had, frequent trips up north to Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, where grandparents and cousins were. Um, but yeah, my first time actually living and working in a Native community, and there were two women that one was a coworker and the other was her sister, and they kind of took me under their wings, and it was the first time that I saw this like strong Native woman who is a leader, and her style of leadership was different than what I had seen previous, and they advocated not just for their own kids, but for everybody's kids. And, the professionalism and the way, they conducted themselves, I thought, I want to be a strong Nishkwe like them.
Yeah.
And, just through a career of living and working in Native communities, I really do see women as doing, that community coalition, um, the style of leadership that's really effective, and that's really, those are the stories I'm most interested in telling, and this happens in other nations too, where if a man gets an education, his life improves. Um, if a woman gets an education, her entire family improves. The outcomes for her children are better, the outcomes in her extended family and her community. And there's something to that. And so I just enjoy writing wonderfully flawed, nuanced Native women.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and like you said, nuanced and imperfect and error, who make errors and mistakes, but also sort of persevere. There's quite a deep theme of perseverance in your books, which is, I think, the lesson we all need to take away because it's, especially in these times, and we don't, we need to talk specifics because we all know what we're talking about. There is we really have to be willing to dig in for the long run because we get knocked sideways. What's the word you use? Strong. I'm gonna, but
Nishkwe, so it's Anishinaabe Kwewug. But Nishkwe, a Native woman.
I love that word. That's a wonderful word. Well, so okay, so this is very exciting. It was this. I want this conversation to go on forever and ever and ever. But I want to ask a little bit about, and I think it's the meanest thing to ask an author whose incredible new book is about to hit the world. But everyone is going to want to know, what's next? What are you going to work on next?
Well, I'm really fortunate that uh, my my book deals with Macmillan. I am working on book 4.
Wonderful.
So if you look at, Firekeeper, Element of Fire, Warrior Girl Unearthed, which looks at NAGPRA, the Native Graves Repatriation Act, I pitched that book as Native Lara Croft, but instead of raiding tombs, she's raiding museums to steal back
Oh, I love
sacred
that.
items and to bring back home. And yeah, and then of course, my third book, Sisters in the Wind, that element of air, that kind of like these children that get tossed to the wind and, what happens to them.
Yeah.
And so my fourth book will involve the element of water, and that's really important for our women's teachings. There's a lot there, and looking at the pipelines that are that run underneath the Mackinac Bridge,
Yeah.
and how tribes have been shut out of that process. And it's not a matter of if, but when there will be an oil spill in the Great Lakes and what that does to, if we get our ceremony from water, what happens when the water is sick.
Yeah. Yes, right. And actually,
Mhm.
I think I have to really, I want to really acknowledge is the power. I mean, there's so much thought behind what the depth and of what you're talking about. These real issues that are, very present and for Native people and also, of course, for all sorts of communities around the things you're addressing because it's not these things don't just affect natives, but of course, I love that you center it because it is at the natives are at the center of it. But also that you do it in such a way that I'm learning so much in the course of reading your books, and yet it's a very delicate skill that I'm just enraptured with the story. I mean, I'm not really paying attention to what I'm learning, and yet I'm coming out of it knowing so much more than I did. And I think that is really I think it's the key actually to talking about, I write about, mothers and being in my 50s now and the things, and I feel the same way. Like we can talk so much about real issues when we put them into a story where we're rooting for the characters, and then at the end of it, I feel like our readers are smarter. We're smarter as humans. We're smarter as advocates of, the earth and each other and other women. And so all those things that you do so beautifully and sort of right under the surface, right? Because I do think we've also read those books where you feel like you're being hammered, over the head. And I think the power is in that the authenticity that is really about the story. These are stories about individuals, and yet we get so much more. The depth is phenomenal.
Right. I'm really glad that you brought up that point because I don't presume that even for a native reader that they know all about a
Right.
particular issue. A lot of Native people have been disconnected from their communities, and so I'm always mindful of that reader that you know starting fresh with a
Right.
particular issue, and storytelling is how we survived. And so that's the power of story is the teachings that you can convey through these characters that readers care about. And that's what makes storytelling so powerful. If it wasn't that powerful, they wouldn't be trying to keep books out of the hands of
Yeah.
the children and teens that desperately need
Right.
to see themselves in stories.
Right. That is, and there you go. That is actually really is at the heart of it is seeing yourself in stories and also seeing people whose shoes you will never walk in stories. And that I think is so powerful, right? Because I'm never going to be a Native woman. I'm never going to know what it's like except for by reading your books, except for by reading books like yours. And then I don't come out of it Native, but I come out of it with empathy. And if we can all read about different types of people, then we gain empathy. And if that isn't going to fix I don't know what is, right?
Right. It's developing that empathy for people that are different than you in some ways, but there's like a core humanity. People from other cultures, they love their children too,
Yeah.
and they, want good futures for their children and to be
Right.
healthy and safe
Yeah.
um, and so yeah, and that really, when I was the director for the Office of Indian Education, that was a prominent national position, and I could speak on any topic, but I know that I'm reaching more people through the pages of a book than I ever could at that national level.
Right.
And so that's why I love doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. It's so powerful. And I think especially since everything now is so polarized, right? We would, you get somebody on the screen, for instance, if you're listening to something or on your news and you think, okay, this person is coming from this. So then you're like, well, I'm gonna discount them because they're not my political party or they're not my whatever. But when you open a book, you're agreeing. The agreement of a reader is I'm gonna follow the story. I'm gonna let myself fall in love or, and love characters or hate them or be frustrated for them or with them or you know and I think that is, and with that we bring down barriers that we just do not bring down in other situations. And I think I agree with you. That's why I think it's the most powerful medium we have available to us. And now when everything's even as polarized, I think, as has ever been historically, it's all the more important. So I hope anyone out there listening who does not know, and I'm going to say, how could you not know Angeline? But if you don't know Angeline, I hope you will pick up her books. And I cannot wait to read the second book, but Sisters in the Wind, what a gorgeous book. And we will be giving away a copy of this gorgeous book. If you are listening to us and you cannot see the covers of all of her books, do go check them out because the art is phenomenal. And you just get such a, it's so clearly a native design and you get such a sense of the books from the covers, which I think is really hard to do. So, um,
Yes.
what a
I would
treat. Oh, sorry.
Yes, and I would say too, for your listeners that my author website is angelineboulley.com. If you type in firekeepersdaughter.com, it's going to take you to the same site. I offer free book plates if you buy the book and you would like it signed. There's a way to request a signed book plate. I'm happy to put it in the mail to you and update my speaking schedule. And I love listeners because in addition to being a voracious reader, my dad was a truck driver. And so we've been listening to audiobooks since they were on cassette tape in the
Yes.
80s.
Yes.
And I love my audiobooks. I've had the same narrator for all three. Her
Oh,
name is Isabella Starr LeBlanc. I was able to select her.
mm.
She is perfection. And she sounds the way the characters sound in my head.
Oh, I love that. And I too, I also, I read so much books that are not, I read your book obviously because it's not an audiobook yet, or at least not, I couldn't get my hands on it quite yet. But I also love audiobooks. And what a great way to get it. I mean, if you're doing something, mundane like cleaning the house or, folding laundry, it's walking the dogs, it's my favorite thing. So absolutely, I love the idea. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get the book too, as an audiobook and listen. So thank you so much, Angeline, for
Much.
joining us.
Thank you very much.
What an incredible treat. Everybody, thank you for joining us on Killer Women today with Angeline Boulley, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.